A 12-year-old boy sneaks food to a forgotten woman in room 214 every afternoon, until the day he finds her gone and a billionaire's attorney walks through the door, asking for him by name. Every afternoon at exactly 4:10 p.m., Rylan Okoye became invisible. Not literally, but close enough. He slipped through the side entrance of Hazelbrook Assisted Living with a crumpled paper bag pressed against his chest, shoulders hunched, eyes down. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. The fluorescent lights hummed the same tired song they always did. Nobody looked at him. Not the nurses hurrying past with medication carts. Not the orderlies wheeling dinner trays back to the kitchen. Not the receptionist filing her nails behind the front desk. To them, Rylan was just the cook's kid. The quiet black boy who waited in the break room while his mother finished her shift. A shadow. A piece of furniture. Forgettable. But to the woman in room 214, he was something else entirely. Mrs. Isabel Hazel didn't forget anyone. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Also, let me tell you something funny. Someone actually bet that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, and honestly, I want to prove them wrong. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and join the family. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a very personal goal for me, and your support would mean the world to me. Thank you for believing in me and being part of this journey. And before you go, drop your name and location in the comments. I'd love to give you a special shout-out in my next video introduction. Rylan had been 12 for 3 months when he first knocked on her door. He hadn't meant to. He'd been looking for his mother, Danica, who worked doubles as a dietary aide just to keep their lights on. That afternoon, she'd only managed to pack him half a peanut butter sandwich for lunch. He'd eaten his half during recess, watching Rocco and the other boys play basketball without him. They never passed him the ball. Never called his name. At school, Rylan had learned that being quiet made you disappear. But being invisible had its advantages. By 4 p.m., he was back at Hazelbrook, stomach still growling, watching a nurse wheel an untouched dinner tray out of room 214. She didn't eat again? Rylan had whispered to his mother in the break room. Danica sighed, rubbing her temples. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes like bruises. She never does. Says the food tastes like cardboard and loneliness. Rylan looked down at the remaining half of his sandwich, wrapped carefully in a napkin. He made a decision. Mrs. Isabel Hazel was 87 years old, sharp as broken glass, and utterly alone. Her silver hair was always pinned back so tightly it pulled at the corners of her eyes. Those eyes, gray and alert, missed nothing. They were the kind of eyes that made you feel seen even when you didn't want to be. When Rylan first appeared in her doorway, she'd glared at him like he was an insult. "What do you want?" she demanded. Rylan swallowed hard. His hand shook as he placed the wrapped sandwich on her bedside table, next to a teacup that had gone cold. "It's extra," he managed. "I didn't order charity." Her voice could have cut steel. "It's not charity," Rylan said softly. "It's just, you didn't eat. And I had some left." Mrs. Hazel stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Then, with trembling fingers that betrayed her sharp tongue, she picked up the sandwich. She took a bite. Then another. She finished every crumb. Rylan stood there, unsure whether to leave or stay. "You can go now," Mrs. Hazel said, not looking at him. "Unless you plan to watch me chew." But the next day, when Rylan knocked at 4:10 p.m., she was waiting. That became their secret. Every afternoon after school, Rylan slipped through Hazelbrook's halls with his paper bag. Sometimes it was half a sandwich. Sometimes fruit his mother had bruised for him from the kitchen. Once, it was a warm bowl of rice he'd saved from dinner, wrapped in foil to keep the heat in. Mrs. Hazel complained about everything. Too dry. Too salty. Too cold. Not enough salt. Too much crust. But she always ate. And she always talked. She told him about the color beige, the color of giving up, about how hospitals had forgotten what real food tasted like, about her late wife Jolie, who'd loved roses and jazz and dancing in the kitchen when no one was watching. Silence, Mrs. Hazel said once, staring out her window at nothing, is louder than pain when you grow old enough. Rylan told her about school. About how teachers always confused him with the other two black boys in his grade, even though none of them looked alike. About how Rocco and Roll, the boys who talked and laughed loud, got remembered, while boys like him who stayed quiet just disappeared. You see people, Mrs. Hazel said, her gray eyes fixed on him. That's dangerous. Why? Because most people don't. And the ones who do can't unsee what the world really is. Rylan didn't understand then. But he remembered. He learned small things about her in pieces, like assembling a puzzle without a picture on the box. She never mentioned family. Never got flowers. Never received cards or phone calls. The television in her room murmured old cooking shows on endless loop, and the hallway clock outside her door ticked away her remaining days with mechanical precision. But when Rylan arrived, something changed in her face. The hardness softened, just slightly. The gray eyes warmed, just a degree. You're late, she'd say, even when he was early. The sandwich is probably terrible, he'd reply. Undoubtedly, she'd agree, already reaching for it. The staff never noticed their ritual. Nurses passed by room 214 without a second glance. Aides delivered medication without conversation. Even Danica, exhausted from double shifts, assumed Rylan was reading in the break room. He was invisible to everyone but her. And she was invisible to everyone but him. Do you ever wonder, Mrs. Hazel asked one afternoon, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup, if anyone would notice if you disappeared? Rylan thought about it. About school hallways where his name was never called. About recess games where he was never picked. About teachers who looked right through him. Sometimes, he admitted. Mrs. Hazel nodded slowly. Someone's always watching, Rylan. Even when you think they're not. Even when you think you're alone. She paused. The question is whether you act the same when no one important is looking. Are you watching me? Rylan asked. Her smile was strange. Sad and knowing. I'm waiting for something. Everyone else has stopped waiting for anything. Rylan didn't understand. But he kept coming. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Rylan pushed through Hazelbrook's side door at 4:10 p.m., paper bag in hand. Inside was half a turkey sandwich and an apple his mother had cut into slices. Mrs. Hazel would complain that turkey was too dry and apples were too loud to chew. She'd eat them anyway. But when Rylan reached room 214, his footsteps slowed. The door was open. Wide open. That never happened. His heart began to pound as he stepped inside. The room was empty. Not just empty of Mrs. Hazel. Empty of everything. The bed had been stripped down to its plastic mattress. The chair where she always sat was gone. The television, the teacup, even the clock she'd complained about, all vanished. The only thing left was the faint smell of disinfectant and the echo of her voice in his memory. Rylan stood frozen in the doorway, the paper bag shaking in his hands. She was gone. Mrs. Hazel was gone. His throat tightened. Had she died? Had she been moved? Why didn't anyone tell him? Why didn't she? Footsteps. Sharp, purposeful footsteps echoed down the hallway. Not the soft rubber soles of nurses' shoes. Not the shuffle of orderlies. Expensive shoes. Leather on linoleum. Rylan turned. 4 men in tailored suits rounded the corner, moving with military precision. Behind them walked a woman who commanded the hallway without saying a word. She was tall, composed, with dark skin, striking features, and eyes that scanned everything with the precision of a security camera. Her heels clicked against the floor like a countdown. The entire hallway fell silent. Nurses stopped mid-step. An orderly pressed himself against the wall. The woman stopped directly in front of Rylan. Her eyes locked onto his. "You must be him," she said. Her voice was smooth, certain, and utterly calm. Rylan's mouth went dry. "Who?" "Rylan Okoye." She said his name like she'd known it for years. The boy who fed Isabel Hazel. The paper bag fell from Rylan's hands. Before he could speak, he heard a gasp from behind him. Rylan! His mother's voice cracked with panic. Rylan, get away from them. Come here. Now. Danica rushed forward, grabbing Rylan's shoulders, pulling him back. Her eyes were wide with fear. I'm sorry. He's not supposed to be in patient rooms. He was just. The woman raised one hand gently. It's all right, Ms. Okoye. Danica froze. How do you know my name? The woman extended her hand. Professional. Deliberate. My name is Farah Hazel. I was Isabel Hazel's attorney. The hallway seemed to tilt. Rylan's voice came out as a whisper. Was. Farah's expression softened, just slightly. Yes. She passed away last night. Danica's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God. I'm so sorry. She was difficult, but she was brilliant, Farah corrected quietly. And very, very deliberate. Farah's eyes returned to Rylan. She glanced down at the fallen paper bag, at the sandwich that had rolled onto the floor. She told me about the food. Rylan blinked. She complained about it. A lot. Farah's smile was faint but genuine. That was her way of saying thank you. One of the suited men stepped forward, speaking in a low voice to Farah. She nodded once, then looked back at Rylan and Danica. I need you both to come with me. Danica shook her head, protective instinct flaring. We're not going anywhere. Whatever this is. Ms. Okoye. Farah's voice remained calm, but there was weight behind it now. Authority. Your son has been named in Isabel Hazel's final arrangements. This concerns him directly. The words hung in the air like smoke. Final arrangements. Rylan looked up at his mother. Danica looked back at him, her face pale with confusion and fear. Farah gestured toward the hallway. Please. We have much to discuss. And very little time. The black car was so quiet it felt wrong. Rylan had never been inside a vehicle that didn't rattle, didn't smell like old fast food, didn't have duct tape holding something together. This car was soundless. The leather seats were soft enough to sink into. The windows were tinted so dark the world outside looked like a dream. He sat stiffly beside his mother, his knees barely reaching the edge of the seat, hands folded in his lap because he was afraid to touch anything. Danica hadn't stopped shaking since they left Hazelbrook. This is a mistake, she whispered, her voice tight with panic. We shouldn't be here. We should call someone. A lawyer. Someone who can. Ms. Okoye. Farah Hazel sat across from them, perfectly composed, her tablet glowing softly in her hands. I understand your concern. But I assure you, everything is being handled correctly. Correctly? Danica's voice cracked. My son is 12 years old. He doesn't belong in. She gestured helplessly at the car, at the suited men in the front seats, at everything. Whatever this is. Farah's expression remained calm, professional. Your son showed extraordinary kindness to someone who desperately needed it. That matters more than you realize. Rylan watched the city blur past the windows. They'd left the familiar streets behind, the check-cashing places, the bus stops, the corner stores with bars on the windows. Now they were moving through a different world entirely. Glass towers stretched toward the sky like monuments. People in expensive suits hurried along pristine sidewalks. Everything gleamed. Everything looked untouchable. Where are we going? Rylan asked quietly. Farah glanced up from her tablet. Downtown. To meet someone who's been waiting to speak with you. About what? About Isabel. And about what happens next. Rylan's stomach twisted. Mrs. Hazel was dead. The thought kept circling in his mind like a bird trapped indoors. She was gone, and he'd never gotten to say goodbye. Never got to bring her one more sandwich. Never got to hear her complain one more time. Did she? Rylan swallowed hard. Did she know? That she was going to, you know? Farah's eyes softened, just slightly. Yes. She knew. And she didn't tell me? She had her reasons. Farah paused. Isabel Hazel was one of the most intelligent people I've ever known. Everything she did was deliberate. The car slowed, turning into an underground parking garage. Security gates opened automatically. The suited men in the front exchanged brief words into earpieces. Danica grabbed Ryland's hand, squeezing tight. The building was more museum than office. White marble floors stretched beneath their feet, polished to a mirror shine. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, supported by pillars that looked like they belonged in ancient Rome. Abstract sculptures stood on pedestals like sentries. Even the air felt expensive, cool, filtered, perfect. Ryland had never felt smaller in his life. His sneakers squeaked against the marble. His jacket, the same one he'd worn all week, suddenly felt threadbare and cheap. Everyone they passed looked like they belonged in a magazine. Confident, polished, important. And here he was. Just a kid who'd shared his lunch. Why am I here? Farah led them to a private elevator that required a keycard. The doors were brushed steel, reflecting their images back at them. Ryland barely recognized himself. A skinny black boy with wide eyes, looking lost and terrified. His mother's reflection looked the same way. The elevator didn't have buttons. It simply began to rise. "Ms. Hazel," Danica said, her voice trembling. "Please, just tell me what's happening. Did my son do something wrong?" "No," Farah said firmly. "He did something right." The elevator stopped on the 23rd floor. The doors opened onto a hallway that was quieter than the car, more hushed than a library. Thick carpet absorbed every sound. The walls were decorated with art that looked older than the building itself. Farah stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. She turned to face them both. "What you're about to see may be difficult to process," she said carefully. "But I need you both to understand, this is not a trick. This is not a scam. Everything that happens from this moment forward is part of Isabel Hazel's final wishes." Ryland's heart hammered against his ribs. Farah opened the door. The room beyond was dim, lit only by the glow of medical monitors and the muted afternoon light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. And in the center of it all was a man. He was elderly, pale as paper, lying back in what looked like a cross between a medical bed and a recliner. Tubes ran from his arm to machines that hummed and beeped softly beside him. His chest rose and fell with mechanical precision. His eyes were closed. He looked like he was dying. "This," Farah said softly, "is Rowan Hazel." Ryland's breath caught. Hazel. The name was everywhere in the city. On buildings. On hospitals. On the sides of buses. Hazel Holdings. Hazel Medical. Hazel Hotels. Billionaire. The word felt too small for what it actually meant. Danica's purse slipped from her fingers, hitting the carpet with a muffled thud. "Oh my God," she whispered. Farah gestured them forward. "Please. Sit." 2 chairs had been positioned near the bed. Ryland moved toward them slowly, like he was approaching something sacred and dangerous at the same time. His mother followed, her hands still gripping his. Up close, Rowan Hazel looked even frailer. His skin was thin as tissue paper. His breathing was assisted by a machine. But his face, gaunt and hollow, held a strange kind of power even in weakness. "Mr. Hazel has been ill for quite some time," Farah explained, standing at the foot of the bed. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He's been in palliative care for 8 months." Danica covered her mouth. "I'm so sorry." Farah nodded. Isabel was his younger sister. His only family. Sister. Ryland's mind spun. Mrs. Hazel had never mentioned having a brother. Never mentioned having any family at all. She'd been alone in that room, day after day, eating terrible food and watching cooking shows and waiting for. "She was testing you," Farah said quietly. Ryland looked up sharply. "What?" Farah moved to a table beside the bed and picked up a thick folder. She opened it, revealing pages and pages of documents. Medical reports. Surveillance logs. Handwritten notes. Isabel Hazel was worth approximately $40 million, Farah said. Inherited wealth, investments, property. But she lived in Hazelbrook assisted living by choice. "Why?" Ryland whispered. "Because she wanted to disappear." Farah's eyes were steady. She wanted to see how the world treated someone with nothing. Someone invisible. Someone forgotten. The words hit Ryland like a fist. Invisible. "And you," Farah continued, looking directly at him, were the only person who saw her. Rylan shook his head. I didn't know. I didn't know she was wealthy. Farah finished. Important? That's exactly the point, Rylan. You didn't know. You didn't help her because you thought she could help you back. You didn't perform for an audience. You simply shared your food with someone who was hungry. Danika's voice was barely audible. Why would she do that? Why would she test a child? Farah closed the folder. Because Rowan asked her to. The machines beeped steadily. The room held its breath. Rowan Hazel, Farah said, has spent his life building an empire. Hotels, hospitals, real estate developments across 6 countries. He's made billions. And in doing so, he's learned one fundamental truth about humanity. She paused. Most people only show their true character when they think no one important is watching. Rylan felt dizzy. The room tilted slightly. He and Isabel had an agreement, Farah continued. She would live among people who didn't know who she was. She would observe. She would wait. And if anyone, showed genuine kindness without expectation of reward, she would document it. Farah opened the folder again, pulling out a photograph. It was Rylan, standing in the doorway of room 214, holding a paper bag. Hazelbrook has security cameras, Farah said. Every hallway, every common area. Not in the rooms themselves, but everywhere else. She pulled out more photographs. Rylan entering the building. Rylan waiting for his mother. Rylan disappearing into room 214, day after day, at exactly 4:10 p.m. Isabel kept notes, Farah said, pulling out handwritten pages. Day 47, he brought an orange today. Complained that it was too much trouble to peel. Peeled it anyway when I said my hands hurt. Rylan's eyes burned. Day 82, asked me about my wife. Actually listened. Didn't check his phone. Didn't look away. Danica was crying silently. Day 115, brought me tea he made himself. It was terrible. I told him so. He laughed. I haven't laughed in 3 years. Farah set the notes down gently. She documented everything, Rylan. Every kindness. Every conversation. Every moment you chose to see her when the rest of the world had forgotten she existed. Rylan couldn't speak. Couldn't move. And then, Farah said, she died. As she knew she would. And she left instructions. The machines beeped. The afternoon light shifted across the room. And slowly, impossibly, Rowan Hazel's eyes opened. They were clear. Aware. Very much awake. He turned his head, just slightly, until his gaze found Rylan's. You fed my sister, he said. His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but it filled the room like thunder. Rylan's throat closed. He nodded. She had millions, Rowan said. Yet you fed her anyway. I didn't know, Rylan managed. Rowan's eyes held his. That's why it mattered. The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of machines keeping a billionaire alive. My sister believed, Rowan said slowly, that the world only shows its true face when it thinks no one important is watching. He drew a shaky breath. So she disappeared. And I watched. Rowan's gaze never left Rylan's face. You didn't perform. You didn't beg. You didn't know you were being tested. His voice grew softer. You simply chose kindness. A long pause. That's rarer than wealth. Rylan felt tears sliding down his face and didn't bother to wipe them away. Rowan Hazel smiled. It was barely visible, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. But it was real. She wasn't testing you, Rylan, he said quietly. She was waiting for you. The silence in the room felt alive. Rylan sat frozen in his chair, tears still wet on his cheeks, staring at the man who had just spoken words that didn't make sense. Words that couldn't be real. She was waiting for you. Rowan Hazel's breathing remained steady, assisted by the quiet machines surrounding him. His eyes, pale blue and impossibly alert, stayed fixed on Rylan with an intensity that made the boy feel transparent, like every thought in his head was visible. I don't understand, Rylan whispered finally. Rowan's thin lips curved slightly. Few people do. That's the problem. Farah stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She moved to the window, where the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city below. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made even the machines seem to quiet. Rowan and Isabel grew up with nothing, she began. Their father was a janitor. Their mother cleaned houses. They shared a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx with 2 other families. Danika's hand tightened around Rylan's. By the time Rowan was 30, he'd built his first hotel, Farah continued. By 40, he owned 12. By 50, Hazel Holdings was a multi-billion-dollar empire. She turned from the window, and somewhere along the way, he forgot what it felt like to be invisible. I didn't forget, Rowan said hoarsely. The world did. Once you have money, no one sees you anymore. They see what you can give them. He paused, drawing a labored breath. Except Isabel. She never forgot where we came from. Farah returned to the table and opened the folder again. This time, she pulled out older documents, photographs yellowed with age, newspaper clippings, handwritten letters. Isabel married young, Farah explained. A woman named Jolie Beaumont. This was 1965. Same-sex marriage wasn't legal. Wasn't safe. They lived together as roommates for 43 years. She held up a photograph. 2 women, arms linked, laughing in front of a rose garden. One had silver hair even then. The other wore a hat covered in flowers. Jolie died 8 years ago, Farah said softly, and Isabel became untethered. Rylan remembered Mrs. Hazel's voice. Silence is louder than pain when you grow old enough. She told me about Jolie, Rylan said quietly. She said Jolie loved dancing in the kitchen. Rowan's eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, they were glassy with unshed tears. Isabel came to me 3 years ago, Rowan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. She said she wanted to do something meaningful. Something that mattered more than money. She had an idea, Farah said. An experiment. She would give away her wealth, but not in the traditional way. Not to institutions or strangers named in a will. She wanted to find someone who embodied the kindness the world had forgotten. Rylan felt his chest tighten. So she disappeared, Farah said. She moved into Hazelbrook under her real name, but without any mention of her wealth. No jewelry. No expensive clothes. Nothing that would signal who she truly was. She became invisible, Rowan said. Just like she'd been in the beginning. Before money. Before the world noticed. Farah pulled out more documents. Medical evaluations. Psychiatric assessments. Legal affidavits. She was tested monthly, Farah explained. To ensure her mental competency. To document that every decision she made was deliberate, not the result of dementia or coercion. Every doctor confirmed the same thing. Isabel Hazel was sharper at 87 than most people at 40. Danica spoke for the first time in minutes. She was testing everyone? Not testing, Rowan corrected. Waiting. Watching. Hoping. For what? Danica asked. For proof, Rowan said, that kindness still exists without an audience. Farah spread the documents across the table like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Isabel's estate is valued at $42 million, she said. Properties, investments, savings. She left detailed instructions for how it should be distributed. Rylan's mouth went dry. $20 million goes to charity, Farah continued. Organizations supporting LGBTQ+ elders, housing initiatives, food banks. Another $10 million goes to medical research, specifically cancer treatment, in honor of Rowan's illness. She paused, her eyes moving to Rylan. And $12 million, she said slowly, goes to Rylan Okoye. The room tilted. Danica stood so abruptly her chair scraped backward. No. Absolutely not. We're not. She shook her head violently. This is insane. He's a child. He doesn't need, we don't want. Ms. Okoye. Rowan's voice cut through her panic like a blade. Sit down. Something in his tone made her obey. Rowan's eyes found hers. Your son didn't ask for this. He didn't scheme for it. He didn't even know it was possible. His breathing was labored but his words were clear. That's exactly why he deserves it. But the press, Danica said desperately. The attention. The people who'll come out of nowhere claiming they know us, wanting pieces of. All of that is true, Farah said calmly. Which is why there are protections in place. She pulled out another document. The funds will be placed in a trust. Rylan cannot access the full amount until he's 25. Until then, it will cover his education, housing, medical care, and a modest living stipend managed by a board of trustees. Who are the trustees? Danica asked. Myself, Farah said. 2 financial advisors from Hazel Holdings. And you, Ms. Okoye, if you agree. Danica stared. Me. Isabel was very specific, Farah said. She wanted Rylan to have stability, not excess. Opportunity, not corruption. She wanted him to grow up normal, despite this. She wanted his mother to have a voice. Rylan felt like he was underwater, hearing everything through a filter of disbelief. $12 million. He thought about the half sandwiches. The bruised fruit. The bowl of rice he'd wrapped in foil. None of it had been about money. None of it had been about anything except an old woman who was hungry and lonely and forgotten. She complained about everything, Rylan said suddenly. His voice cracked. She said the sandwiches were too dry. She said I didn't cut the apples thin enough. She said I talked too quietly. Rowan smiled. Actually smiled. She was difficult. But she always ate, Rylan continued, tears spilling over again. She always finished everything. And she always, his voice broke. She always waited for me. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Mrs. Hazel, day 89, holding a slice of apple and squinting at it like it personally offended her. This is uneven, she'd said. Do they not teach precision in schools anymore? I cut it with a plastic knife from the cafeteria, Rylan had replied. Excuses. But she'd eaten it anyway. Then she'd looked at him with those gray eyes. You know what I appreciate about you, Rylan? What? You don't need me to be grateful. Rylan blinked back to the present. She saw me, he whispered. No one else did. But she did. Yes, Rowan said softly. And you saw her. When the entire world had stopped looking. Farah closed the folder. There's something else you need to understand. This inheritance won't be quiet. Isabel's will is a public document. The media will find out. Distant relatives, cousins, nephews, people who never visited her once, will come forward. They'll claim she was manipulated. They'll question her mental state. They'll say a 12-year-old boy couldn't possibly deserve this. Will they win? Danica asked, fear sharp in her voice. No, Farah said firmly. Isabel prepared for this. Every medical evaluation, every security camera recording, every handwritten note, it's all documented. Her competency is unquestionable. Her intentions are clear. But they'll still try, Rowan added. They'll drag your name through the media. They'll scrutinize everything about you. About your family. About your life. He looked at Rylan with something like respect. Are you prepared for that? Rylan thought about school. About being invisible. About teachers who forgot his name and boys who never picked him for their team. He thought about his mother working double shifts, her hands rough from cleaning, her eyes tired from never sleeping enough. He thought about Mrs. Hazel, alone in room 214, eating half a sandwich and complaining that it wasn't cut properly. I just wanted to help her, Rylan said quietly. I didn't want anything back. I know, Rowan said. That's why this matters. He motioned weakly toward Farah, who opened one final document. This is Isabel's final letter, Farah said. Written 2 weeks before she died. She wanted Rylan to have it. She handed the paper to Rylan. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. Rylan's hands trembled as he read. Dear Rylan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't be sad. I've lived long enough to see everything worth seeing, except, perhaps, what comes next. You probably think you were helping me. Feeding a grumpy old woman who didn't know how to say thank you. But you were doing something much bigger. You were proving that kindness still exists when no one's watching. That empathy isn't transactional. That some people still see other people, really see them, even when the world tells them to look away. The money doesn't matter. What matters is that you never stopped showing up. You never stopped seeing me, even when I was invisible to everyone else. Don't let the world make you invisible, Rylan. Don't let it teach you to stop caring. And remember, I wasn't testing you. I was waiting for you. And you were worth the wait. Isabel. Rylan's vision blurred. The words swam on the page. Rowan's voice broke the silence. My sister spent her whole life waiting to matter to someone who didn't want her money. And you gave her that. He paused, his breathing shallow. So now, Rylan Okoye, I'm giving you a choice. You can refuse this inheritance. You can walk away. No one will blame you. Or, Farah added, you can accept it. Use it. Build something meaningful with it. Honor what Isabel believed you could become. Rylan looked at his mother. Danika's face was wet with tears, but her eyes held something new. Pride, fear, hope, all tangled together. What do you want to do, baby? She whispered. Rylan folded the letter carefully. He thought about Mrs. Hazel's voice, her complaints, her sharp wit hiding bottomless loneliness. He thought about all the invisible people in the world. All the ones nobody saw. Nobody remembered. I want to say yes, he said quietly. But I want to do something good with it. Something she would have liked. Rowan's smile was tired but genuine. Then it's yours. Farah pulled out one final document. Sign here. Your mother will co-sign as your legal guardian. As Rylan took the pen, Rowan spoke one more time. The world is about to notice you, Rylan. And not everyone will like what they see. But remember, you earned this by being exactly who you were when you thought no one was watching. Rylan signed his name. The machines beeped steadily. And somewhere outside, beyond the glass towers and pristine streets, the world began to shift. The headlines started before they even left the building. Billionaire's sister leaves $12 million to 12-year-old boy. Elderly heiress's secret test, the child who passed. Sandwich kindness leads to massive inheritance. Rylan saw them on Farah's tablet as they rode the elevator down. Each headline felt like a spotlight turning toward him, burning away the invisibility he'd worn his entire life. It's already starting, Farah said, her voice calm but tinged with warning. By tonight your name will be everywhere. By tomorrow morning, reporters will be outside your apartment. Danika's face went pale. Our apartment? I'm having you moved to a secure location, Farah said. Just temporarily. Until the initial frenzy dies down. A secure location? Danika's voice rose. We can't just leave our home. I have work tomorrow. Rylan has school. Ms. Okoye. Farah's tone was gentle but firm. Your son just inherited $12 million. Your lives changed the moment he signed that document. The world will not leave you alone. The elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby. Even in the few hours they'd been upstairs, something had shifted. People stared, whispered. A security guard near the entrance spoke urgently into his radio. Rylan felt every eye on him. This is what being seen feels like, he thought. This is what I wanted. But now that it was happening, it felt like drowning. The first 3 days were a blur. Farah moved them to a hotel suite downtown, the kind with rooms bigger than their entire apartment, with bathrooms that had heated floors and a kitchen Danika was afraid to touch. The phone calls started immediately. Distant relatives Rylan had never heard of. Second cousins. Third cousins. People claiming to be family friends who remembered Danika from way back when. All of them with the same undertone. Surely you'll share. Surely you'll remember family. Danika stopped answering after the first day. The news coverage was relentless. Inheritance controversy. Family members contest will. Who is Rylan Okoye? Inside the boy who charmed a billionaire. Legal experts weigh in. Can a child inherit millions? Rylan watched the coverage on the hotel television, his stomach twisting tighter with each segment. They showed his school photo, the one from last year where his eyes looked too wide and his smile too forced. They showed Hazelbrook assisted living. They showed his apartment building, and Rylan felt violated seeing his home broadcast to millions of strangers. They're making it sound like I tricked her, Rylan said quietly. His mother sat beside him on the enormous couch, her arm around his shoulders. "They don't know you. They don't know what you did. What if they're right?" Rylan whispered. "What if I don't deserve it?" Danica turned his face toward hers. "Listen to me. You fed a lonely woman when no one else cared. You showed up every single day. You didn't do it for money or attention. You did it because it was right." Her eyes were fierce. "That's all that matters." But Rylan wasn't sure the world agreed. On the fourth day, the legal challenges began. 3 of Isabel's distant relatives filed a joint petition claiming she'd been mentally incompetent. They produced their own experts who'd never examined her, who claimed that no reasonable person would leave millions to a stranger's child. Farah held a press conference. She was surgical in her precision. Isabel Hazel was evaluated by 4 independent psychiatrists over a 3-year period, she stated, her voice carrying across the crowded room. Every evaluation confirmed her complete mental competency. She documented her reasoning extensively. She knew exactly what she was doing. A reporter shouted from the back, "But why a child? Why not family?" Farah's expression didn't change. Because her family never visited, never called, never acknowledged her existence until there was money involved. The room erupted. That night, the narrative began to shift. Where were the relatives? Elderly Eris died alone. Family only appears after death, a pattern of neglect? The boy who saw her, Rylan Okoye's daily visits documented. Hazelbrook released security footage, grainy but clear. Rylan entering the building, day after day, always at 4:10 p.m. Always carrying a paper bag. Always disappearing into room 214. The footage showed something else too. The empty hallway outside Mrs. Hazel's room. The nurses who passed without stopping. The dinner trays wheeled away untouched. The absence of visitors. Of flowers. Of anyone who cared. The public began to see what Rylan had seen. A woman invisible to everyone who should have loved her. Rowan Hazel gave only one interview. He did it from his medical bed, tubes still connected, death still waiting patiently nearby. The reporter was careful, respectful, but the questions were pointed. "Mr. Hazel, some say your sister was taken advantage of." "My sister," Rowan interrupted, his voice hoarse but strong, "was the smartest person I've ever known. Smarter than me. Smarter than everyone in my company combined." He paused for breath. She wanted to find goodness in a world that had forgotten what that meant. And she found it in a 12-year-old boy who shared his lunch. But $12 million is less than what most people spend on marketing campaigns that accomplish nothing, Rowan said. "My sister invested in humanity. That's worth more than all the buildings I've ever built." The interview went viral. Billionaire defends boy's inheritance. She invested in humanity. Rowan Hazel's final lesson: kindness over commerce. Slowly, gradually, the tide turned. 2 weeks after signing the documents, Rylan returned to school. It was exactly as terrible as he'd feared. Everyone knew. Teachers smiled at him differently, some genuine, some calculating. Kids who'd never spoken to him before suddenly wanted to sit at his table. Rocco, who'd never passed him the ball in 3 years, invited him to play basketball. "Hey, Rylan," Rocco said, grinning too wide. "We should hang out sometime. My dad said maybe you could come over. He wants to meet you." "I bet he does," Rylan thought. But he said, "Maybe," and walked away. In the cafeteria, he sat alone. By choice this time. And watched. He watched the kids who were still invisible. The quiet ones. The ones sitting by themselves, eating quickly so they could leave before anyone noticed them. He saw himself in every one of them. And he wondered, what would Mrs. Hazel do? The answer came 3 weeks later, back at Hazelbrook. Rylan had asked Farah if he could visit. Not Mrs. Hazel's old room, that felt too raw, too painful. But the building itself. The hallways he'd walked. The people he'd seen but never really noticed. "Are you sure?" Danica had asked. "I need to," Rylan said. "I need to see it again." So they went. Together. The staff recognized him immediately. Some looked embarrassed. Others defensive. The receptionist who'd never looked up from her nail filing now stood when he entered. "Mr. Okoye," she said. "We're so glad." "I'm just visiting," Rylan said quietly. He walked the hallways slowly, Danica beside him. Everything looked the same. The fluorescent lights. The smell of disinfectant. The distant sound of televisions murmuring. But something was different now. Rylan saw the residents differently. Saw their loneliness. Their waiting. Their invisibility. He passed room 189. The door was open. Inside, an elderly black man sat in a wheelchair, staring out the window. His dinner tray sat untouched on the table beside him. Rylan stopped. He thought of Mrs. Hazel. Of her uneaten trays. Of her sharp tongue hiding desperate loneliness. He thought of the half sandwich that had changed everything. Without planning to, without thinking it through, Rylan walked into the room. "Excuse me," he said softly. The man turned. His eyes were clouded with cataracts, but they focused on Rylan with surprising intensity. "You're that boy," the man said. "From the news." Rylan nodded. "Yes, sir. Everyone's been talking about you." The man's voice was rough and used. "Said you were kind to Mrs. Hazel." "I tried to be." The man looked at his untouched tray. "Food here tastes like cardboard." Rylan smiled. He'd heard that before. "I know," he said. Mrs. Hazel said the same thing. He glanced at his mother, standing in the doorway. She was crying, but she was smiling too. She nodded. Rylan pulled up a chair. "What's your name, sir?" "Marcus," the man said. "Marcus Webb." "I'm Rylan. Do you mind if I sit with you for a bit, Mr. Webb?" Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face, suspicion giving way to something fragile and grateful. "I don't mind at all." The photograph appeared the next day. Someone, a nurse, maybe, or a visitor, had taken it through the doorway. Rylan sitting beside Marcus Webb's wheelchair. Two people talking. One very old, one very young. One invisible, one suddenly famous. Both finally seen. The inheritance boy returns. Rylan Okoye visits elderly resident. Full circle, act of kindness continues after fortune. He didn't forget. 12-year-old's quiet compassion inspires thousands. The image spread across social media. People shared it, commented, cried over it. But Rylan didn't do it for the cameras. He did it because Marcus Webb was alone. Because his dinner sat untouched. Because loneliness sounded exactly the same in room 189 as it had in room 214. He did it because Mrs. Hazel had taught him that seeing people, really seeing them, was the most dangerous and most important thing a person could do. 1 month after signing the inheritance documents, Rylan sat with his mother in the hotel suite that had become their temporary home. The legal challenges had been dismissed. The relatives had retreated, bitter but defeated. The media had moved on to the next sensation. Life hadn't returned to normal. It never would, but it had found a new rhythm. "Farah called," Danica said. "She wants to set up the first trustee meeting. Start discussing how to manage the funds for your education." Rylan nodded. "Okay." She also said. Danica paused. "She said Rowan wants to see you. One more time." Rylan's chest tightened. "Is he?" "Soon," Danica said softly. She said it would be soon. They went the next day. Rowan Hazel looked smaller than before. Friendlier. The machines around him seemed louder, more insistent. But his eyes were still sharp when Rylan entered. "You went back," Rowan said without preamble. Rylan sat in the chair beside the bed. "Yes, sir." "To Hazelbrook?" "Yes." "Why?" Rylan thought about it. About Marcus Webb and his untouched dinner. About all the invisible people still waiting, still hoping someone would see them. "Because Mrs. Hazel wasn't the only one," Rylan said quietly. "There are people like her everywhere. And most of them die without anyone noticing they were there." Rowan smiled. It was tired but genuine. "My sister chose well." They sat in silence for a moment. The machines beeped. The city hummed beyond the windows. "I spent my whole life building things," Rowan said finally. "Hotels. Hospitals. Monuments to achievement." He paused. But you know what I'll be remembered for? Ryland shook his head. Having a sister who knew that kindness was worth more than any building I ever constructed. Rowan's hand moved slightly on the blanket. Ryland reached out and held it. She saw you, Ryland. In a world that had stopped seeing her, you made her visible again. His voice cracked. You gave her proof that humanity still existed. She gave me that too, Ryland whispered. Rowan's eyes closed. Then you both won. Rowan Hazel died 3 days later. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people, dignitaries, business leaders, politicians. But Ryland was given a seat in the front row, next to Farah. He didn't cry during the service. He'd already cried, alone in his hotel room, thinking about 2 siblings from the Bronx who'd built empires but never forgot what it meant to be invisible. After the service, as people mingled and networked and performed grief, Ryland slipped away. He found a quiet corner of the cemetery, a bench beneath an old oak tree, and he sat. He thought about Mrs. Hazel complaining about sandwiches, about Rowan watching from his medical bed, about Marcus Webb's clouded eyes lighting up when someone finally sat with him. He thought about all the invisible people in the world, the ones nobody saw, the ones nobody remembered. He thought about what Mrs. Hazel had written, "Don't let the world make you invisible, Ryland." He wouldn't. He would see people. He would remember them. He would show up, day after day, at exactly the time he said he would. Not because cameras were watching. Not because headlines would follow. But because kindness mattered most when no one important was paying attention. Because in a world that had forgotten how to see, being seen, really, truly seen, could save a life. Even if that life was just one lonely person in room 214, waiting for a boy with half a sandwich and a heart that refused to look away. Ryland walked through the halls of Hazelbrook Assisted Living at 4:10 p.m. He carried a bag of sandwiches, enough for 6 people today. The staff knew him now, smiled at him, but he didn't come for them. He came for Marcus Webb in room 189, for Dorothy Chin in room 176, for Abraham Kowalski in room 203, for all the invisible people still waiting, still hoping, still believing that someone, somewhere, might remember they existed. The media had stopped following him. The relatives had stopped calling. The world had moved on. But Ryland hadn't. He knocked on room 189. Marcus's rough voice called out, "Come in." Ryland entered, bag in hand, smile on his face. "Brought turkey today, Mr. Webb." Marcus grinned. "Probably dry." "Definitely dry," Ryland agreed. And they both laughed. Outside, the world spun on. Cruel and beautiful. Harsh and forgiving. Full of people who saw and people who didn't. But in room 189, in a forgotten corner of an assisted living facility, 2 people sat together. One very old. One very young. Both visible. Both seen. Both proof that kindness, quiet, consistent, unwitnessed kindness, could change everything. Even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.